Alright, so I got requests to do a caster Gilgamesh video versus Lanling after doing my Lanling video yesterday, and yeah, these two fit a very, very, very similar role when it comes to team building. Like, they do almost the exact same thing with little changes here and there, but I do need to stress at the very beginning of the video, if I say that I think Lanling is better, or if I say that I think caster Gilgamesh is better, I'm not calling anybody a dummy, alright? Like, you can use whatever servants you want in the game, because you can pretty much beat every piece of content in the game with whatever team build you want. Now, I'm not saying go fight Ibuki Doji in Lost Belt 5.5 with, like, a bunch of lanterns or something. Like, you're going to be in for a hard time, but you generally know what I mean. Use who you want. Even if your favorite character was, like, Steno or something, you can still get some use out of her and still make her look somewhat good, right? It's not impossible to do. So, with that being said, before we get into all this, like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I upload these FGO videos every single day, and that really does help me out. Click that join button if you want to, support the channel even further, and let's take a deep dive into this. Now, looking at their hits, right, their hits are somewhat comparable, right? You might notice, though, that Caskill's NP gen is really, really low, and that's because he's got crazy hits. So usually when you have, like, really insane hits on all of your cards and everything, especially in the arts cards, they're gonna tank your NP gen. So even with some arts crits, Caskill is probably gonna struggle a bit to get his NP, but that's fine because he's a support type servant, and while his NP does do some good things, it's not super crazy if it takes you like a turn, 2, 3 turns to get it, right? Whereas Lanling, you'll notice, is a bit more built to doing stronger arts NP gen crits, right? Because he actually does need to get to his NP. He needs to get to his NP to make full use of his utility and everything, right? So, now let's look at their kits, right? So now that that's out of the way, I think it's hard for me to say that I prefer Lanling's deck, because once we get into the first skill, it automatically makes Caskill's deck super crazy, because he's giving everybody 100% party star-wide gen, right, for 3 turns, and that is stupid crazy. Remember how arts cards have like a 0% chance to gen stars? Well, this basically guarantees that, like, so that arts card, like, each one of those has 5 hits. It guarantees that that arts card will gen at least 5 stars. And he's got 3 of those, like, those arts cards, right? That's crazy. The Buster cards already actually have a decent NP gen value, so they're going to be genning a lot of stars. And then, I don't know if you've seen this NP, but it's got 10 hits. If you have this skill active while he's got this NP ready to go, you're going to be dropping a hefty amount of stars. And let's not even consider that you have like 2 Caskills, or you're using the Wombo Combo Dream Team that I suggested in the last video, which was using these 2 together. Caskill is going to be genning an insane amount of stars, and everybody's going to be critting, and he really does fix one of the fundamental problems of an arts team, and that is genning stars. Now, Lanling also tries to do this, but he's only giving 50%, so you're not guaranteed those hits, but it's very good in conjunction with other people's star rates. So, like, using him in conjunction with someone like Emiya, or like Raiko, Iskandar with Caskill, he's a very good additional piece, but Caskill is giving that insane buff all on his own. He's the main guy providing the star gen, right? But then, when I say that they do things that are very similar, they both have a charisma, right? Caskill's is 21% because he's Gilgamesh. I mean, Lanling is 20%. It's a 1% difference. Technically, this is better by 1%. And then, Caskill also has the party-wide arts buff by 30%, where Lanling's is 20%. So that's also a bit inferior for him. But Caskill is then only giving debuff success rate, which is not the same as this right here, which is buff success rate. This is more like, for Caskill, it's more like getting a stun chance, or charming an enemy, or lowering their defense, right? It's making sure a lot of that stuff will hit a bit more, which is still very good, and it's not, I'm not going to try to demean it, but I do value something like this a bit more, giving buff success rate, because that typically ties to characters like Ozymandias, Nero, or even Lanling himself, who, if you can give them this massive buff success rate, they can greatly help the party out. And this is actually where I think things turn a bit for Lanling. While his charisma might be weaker by 1%, his arts performance is weaker by 10%, His star regen is weaker by 50%. His crit damage does actually win out. He has 50% crit damage that he gives to the entire party, and that is on a skill, meaning it is on demand for 3 turns, whereas Caskill has to fire his NP to give the party 30% crit damage for 3 turns, which is still really good. Like, any crit damage is fine. It could be worse. It could be like 10% crit damage, but it's still 20% less than what Lanling is giving, and Lanling's is more on demand. Now, Caskill is giving the party defense as well when it comes to his NP, so he's buffing the entire party's survivability, but I don't think that really comes close to Lanling's own survivability, having the coup dodge skill but with invincibility, meaning for 2 attacks for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown, Lanling's pretty much got himself covered. Anything short of pierce invincibility or buff removal is gonna not, get through this invincibility that he has for himself. So Lanling, unlike Caskill, has a hard survivability, comparable party-wide attack buff, less arts performance, less star gen, but more crit damage. It's more accessible because it's on demand, and he's giving a better type of success rate, increase. Like, the debuff success rate is nice, but I think the buff success rate is something that I value more, and he has the ability to give NP to an ally. Now, then we come to their actual NP. Speaking of, Caskill's, instead of doing more support, is just doing damage, and he does decent damage with it, which is fine, because there are people that prefer their DPS to actually, not DPS, but their support to actually be able to put out a little bit of DPS, right, to actually do a bit of damage and assist the other members of the party. And do keep in mind, it does have some utility because it is increasing defense, it's lowering the enemy's defense, so if you put it in front of another person's NP, not only is it going to gen a lot of stars because of its hits, but it's going to increase that second NP's overcharge and reduce all enemies' defenses by 20 to 40%, which is actually going to further increase the damage of the second NP. Which you can do the same thing with Lanling, and it's probably going to work out to the same effect. You're probably just going to get less damage technically, because while he's giving 30% attack, which is going to buff the damage of the second NP, still doing the overcharge thing, it's like Caskill is actually doing damage. And so, even though 30% attack more than lowering their defense by 20%, Caskill still is doing damage himself. So that plus the second NP is probably going to lead to more damage overall. Plus the stars that Caskill is dropping is going to almost guarantee that people are going to be able to do crits. Especially if you give Caskill like 20, 30 or something, he's going to be insane. But you got to also remember that Lanling is giving a bit of survivability as well to the entire team. Instead of giving 20% defense, he's giving damage cut, which is like equally as powerful, if not even more powerful. And then he's also ensuring that the opponents are not going to fire their NPs at you. He's going to reduce their chance of doing critical hits. And then, he's giving all the other buffs, right? So when it comes down to it, they both do very, very similar things. But it kind of comes down to, do you want to do a bit more damage and move quickly but be a bit more vulnerable, or do you want to be a bit more safe with Lanling over here? Because with Lanling, he's keeping himself safe, he's giving the damage cut, he's giving the attack, the extra crit damage. It's a little less with the arts and the star gen rate, but you're moving a bit safer. You also have a way to control the enemy's NP, make sure you yourself don't get crit. You're moving pretty safely, right? And then, for people that were screaming at the beginning of the video, yeah, if you wanted to say that Lanling technically has a charisma of 50% because of his NP, it's like, yeah, if you have his NP turn 1 when you fire that off, yeah, I guess his charisma is better, but I wasn't counting that, right? But if you move over to Caskill, you're getting far less survivability because 20% defense, that's nice, but unless you're stacking other defensive buffs with it, it's not really going to mean squat, right? So with him, though, you're getting more offense, right? Like, you're getting massive star gen, which, keep in mind, if you have other servants that have, like, high hits on all of their cards, they're also going to gen a lot of stars as well. Because Caskill is not a primary DPS. He's like a support type servant that also happens to do damage, that way he drops a lot of stars. But remember, you're going to have 2 other servants that are also going to be genning a lot of stars, right? So this is not just him. Like, I've only been speaking about Caskill using this, but keep in mind, you got other people that are using it. So with him, you got ridiculous stars. You're basically going to be critting all over the place, getting very good attack, very high art buff for everybody. The debuff success rate, I know I was kind of saying that I prefer Lanlings, but this is still good because it's going to not ensure, but help that you're going to lower enemy defense. You're going to get off those stuns. You're going to get those charms off. Anything that you can do to the enemy to kind of keep them locked down, it's going to make it that much easier to get. And then he's still giving the crit damage, and then he's reducing their defense to just further increase the damage you do to your opponent. So it really comes down to, do you prefer a bit of a riskier type of gameplay with Caskill where you're doing a lot more damage, or do you want to go slow and steady with Lanling and still do decent damage, but take things a bit slower and try to keep yourself alive? Now, for me personally, if you're to hold me down, I more prefer the Caskill type. I like being able to get a whole bunch of big stars, get to do a lot of big crits, do a lot of damage. You know, that's my preferred style of gameplay, but that's not always going to work out for a lot of boss battles, right? You're going to have a lot of boss battles where you need your supports to be able to take care of themselves. You're going to need to be in there for the long haul. You're going to need things like this where you can control their NP gauge and prevent yourself from getting blown up, right, by crits and everything. It's just, like, I don't like, you hold me down. I would prefer to take Caskill, but the more that we move into more and more harder content, Caskill being a bit more volatile and not having a lot of hard defense to go off of is really going to hinder him going forward. But with that being said, Caskill still has not received any buffs to any of his skills, and we could easily see something like 30% NP gen for the entire party slapped onto this, 50% NP gen to the entire party slapped on that. Maybe this is like, to supplement the 30% crit damage here, maybe this gives the entire party that attack, and then it also gives them like 20% crit damage as well for 3 turns. You know, they could start supplementing some of his skills to either help him do really quick bursts of damage to really help his style of gameplay, or they might slap on, like, I don't know, like an invincibility on himself for 1 turn, a party-wide invincibility for 1 attack, you know, something along those lines. I think either a party-wide invincibility or getting like 20% crit damage to the entire party or the NP gen are all very likely things. It just depends on what they want to go with for Caskill, but they can't make him too tanky or too sustain based, because then that kind of intrudes on what Lanling is trying to do. But I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. I saw a lot of people in the comments of the Lanling video being like, oh yeah, like I like Lanling, but I'm still going to use Caskill, or I like Caskill, but I'm going to use Lanling, and they were like, hey, you're going to do a comparison video, and I was like, you know what, we got the time. You know, FGO is in a pretty steady place right now. I think I got the time to make this Lanling versus Caskill video. But let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Remember to click that like button, subscribe, all that good stuff to help your boy out. Click that join button if you're interested in becoming a channel member. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.